Now, let's talk about what is happening, particularly in Queensland, where, put simply, Annastacia Palaszczuk had a bet. Her bet was that under the cover of COVID, everyone would forget what she has done to Queensland for 2 terms in a row. An unemployment rate that even today is worse than Victoria, and they're not allowed to leave their house. It's a situation where, literally, in the past month, 38,000 full-time jobs were created in all of Australia. Just 179 full-time jobs were created in Queensland. Now, the Premier went all in on her bet that COVID and borders would be like a Jedi mind trick. We have not ruined the state. There is no youth crime. We don't have matters before the Corruption Commission. Jackie Trad doesn't exist. But of course, like most people who bet, her bet hasn't quite worked out. Now, she's had people around her to try to help with the bet, like a chief health officer who says the reason that a girl can't go to Queensland to her father's funeral is because she's from the ACT. And despite the fact that the ACT had not had a coronavirus case in weeks and weeks and weeks, this was the reason why a dying father was not able to see his daughter, and that daughter was not able to be at his funeral after he died.
Canberra is defined as a hot spot because it's within the middle of New South Wales.
Because it's in the middle of New South Wales. It still is. But thankfully, that situation has, well, because the virus isn't there anymore, had to fall away. The border bet was also one that the Labor Party thought they could ride all the way to winning the election at the end of October. Their General Secretary was even writing emails to supporters saying that there was just, and I quote, 60 days left to keep the borders safe. The Premier, of course, thought that she would be able to, under the cover of COVID, talk about nothing but coronavirus, hoping, and she'd be the only person in Australia who was hoping, that things would stay as bad as they were because of the Andrews government and their failures in hotel quarantine. She was more than happy for a situation where that aforementioned girl, Sarah, a Queenslander who lived in the ACT, who had to go into 2 weeks of hotel quarantine, was forced to go into hotel quarantine, but most Queenslanders would have been completely cool with what her hotel quarantine situation was like. Well, I've got some footage for you tonight. It comes via the Daily Mail's website. Have a look at this. This is the exercise period that Queenslanders have been put through under Palaszczuk's border policy. Literally, that's exercise time, where for 30 minutes a day, Australians had to walk around in a pen like it was exercise time at Supermax at Goulburn Jail. But again, the Premier thought that her bet would be that people wouldn't care, that it was all for their safety. While at the very same time, if you had enough money, this is what your quarantine looked like if you were a member of the AFL, where their exercise time was limited to the pool bar, the pool, the golf course, the 5-star resort, the cinema room. Because you see, there's one standard for them and there's one standard for normal Queenslanders. But like a gambler who is chasing a feature on a poker machine and they are running out of money, do I know the feeling? Or a boxer who is starting to fade in the 11th round, or a football team that is losing in the second half. Cases are falling. So dramatically that this is a map of New South Wales. Here in regional New South Wales, the virus, frankly, doesn't exist. The closest that you can get to Sydney are local government areas that are slightly shaded in there, and we do it in picture form because that's how the Premier probably can best understand things. The darker the blue, the more the cases. Basically, bar Sydney, where you see a little dot of blue or a little dot of blue, that's one case. One case. Yet the border must stay closed because that's the bet that she is making between now and October 30. But her bet is failing. The Northern Territory is going to let people in from New South Wales. South Australia is going to let people in from New South Wales. The borders are coming down. Her bet is failing. And today, we learnt that the Defence Force, who you wouldn't think anyone's dream of serving their country, was to patrol the border between Tweed Heads and Coolangatta. Those ADF personnel are now going to have to be redeployed. in part because they are going to be needed desperately for when the cyclone season is going to kick in and there will be real damage and real work for them to be done. So her bet is not working. Yet, her Deputy Premier thinks every day we talk about the borders means we don't have to talk about the reality of what we have done to Queensland in the 2 terms that we have been in government. Here he is, yet again, trying to pick a fight with the Prime Minister, who, according to polls, is more popular than Palaszczuk in Queensland, even on the virus.
I really don't think the Defence Force should be used as a bargaining chip in what is an ongoing political attack from the federal government on the state government. Our policies have worked and they should back off.
But you see, the bet has failed because they thought that they wouldn't have to explain their actions in government. As the borders become less of a reason to hide, the reality of the Queensland government is now there for all to be seen. Queensland Health, under the administration of this Health Minister and the Deputy Premier, was $500 million late in paying for basics for their hospitals. That bloke tried to have an upgrade of the computer system, it didn't work. Hospitals didn't have enough money to pay for bandages. They didn't have enough money to pay for food. That is the reality of the Queensland government. Meantime, the former Chief of Staff to the Premier, we learned today, did not declare that he had a financial interest in a company that ended up getting taxpayers' money. But apparently, because it's the state of Palaszczuk, that's not an act of corruption. The Premier too has spent $500,000 on polling on her border bet. Money that wasn't Labor Party money, it was taxpayers' money, and she won't tell anyone what that polling actually showed. The cover of COVID has seen your local council cancel New Year's Eve. It's seen a lot of things change in our societies. But you can't hide behind border politics when there is no need to keep the wall up. There is no need for the hard wall that still exists here on the border between New South Wales and Victoria. Sure, there might be a 50k border bubble, but as a mate told me just before the show, in regional Australia, that's the trip to netball. 50k's might seem like an awfully large period if you're sitting in the bureaucracies of Brisbane or Sydney, but if you're in regional Australia, it's a quick trip. Remember, in regional Australia, these are places where you measure distance in hours in the car rather than kilometres. And you try to beat that record every time you drive. They laugh. I don't know what you're talking about. We're great drivers here. The bet is failing. Palaszczuk is toast. While the south-east of Queensland might fall for it because the 6 p.m. news is in her pocket, anywhere north of the Sunshine Coast is calling bullshit. This Premier cannot hide behind a strategy as before we even get to September 30, there is no need for that border to still be as aggressively patrolled. Sure, hotspots of Sydney, absolutely the hotspots of Melbourne. But regional Australia, Premier, get stuffed.